So Rich, I was doing a live stream on the YouTube channel yesterday. I did 2 Milly drafts in a row. The first draft went really well. It was actually the 3rd Milly draft in a row that I'd done live stream wise. That was just awesome. And then I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go with another draft. And as I'm drafting, I sneeze. Okay. So as I sneeze, you know, like phlegm starts to formulate in my nose and stuff like that, because I'm a human being. I'm not an alien. And I can't like talk as well. It's just kind of like gross sounding and feeling. So I'm like, all right, guys, give me 1 second. I'm going to go blow my nose. Okay. I have a Shure SM7B microphone, which to those who are in the podcasting space, you know that that's a good microphone. Like it's an expensive microphone because this is my job. Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. Like this is my job. So I want the microphone to be good. And usually like I'm in the front of my house where my office is. There's lawnmowers going on outside. There's people screaming at times in my house, outside my house. You know, it's just a neighborhood thing. Kids are playing, all that kind of stuff. Nothing gets picked up on this mic. Like I could even walk away or, you know, walk 2 or 3 feet from the microphone. It would not pick up my voice. Okay. But yesterday, because my bathroom's right behind this wall, yesterday I get up and I go and I blow my nose. And lo and behold, the Shure 7M SB or 7B picks up a freaking nose trumpet. The biggest blow your nose noise that you have ever heard in your life. And everyone on that stream heard it. And all I got to say is, guys, I'm a dad. Deal with it. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing good, man. The summer of Bill continues. There's nothing that can stop Jacory Krosky Merritt. Unstoppable force.
Dude, I'll tell you what. I will never forget when it was maybe June, like late June into early July, and David Kitchen messages me and he's like, hey, go check your exposure on DraftKings. I hadn't done it, right? And I drafted probably, I don't know, 100 to 120 teams at that time. And I go and I look and he's like, all right, take a screenshot. So I took a screenshot because we were just comparing exposure. This is what we do. And I had like 12% JCM at the time. This is again, this is like late June, early July. And he's like, what is going on right now? Why do you have 12% Jacory Krosky Merritt? And I'm like, I don't know, man. I mean, like I've done studies and looked at the fact that like these day 3 rookie running backs, when they have, you know, good production, it's usually coming from more ambiguous backfield situations. And I don't like Brian Robinson. I have been very, very vocal about the anti-Brian Robinson take. So of course I'm going to draft Austin Eckler and I'm going to draft Jacory Krosky Merritt. I never, ever expected this to happen. Ever. I mean, this is just, it's crazy. It's out of control. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about on the show today. And I did talk to our guest today about this a little bit, Connor Allen, and thinking about, you know, I have good exposure to JCM and now he's getting, and I only have 10 Milly drafts left at this moment. So I'm probably going to be fading JCM over the next 10 drafts that I do in the Milly because I got such value out of him. But I do think that it's an interesting conversation to have of, if you didn't get him earlier, do you draft him now? What should you be doing with the Commanders' backfield? All that good stuff. My stance is, and again, we get into it more because I've already done the interview with Connor, but my stance is that you can still draft him as long as it doesn't get like if you feel the value is there in the moment right now, fine, take him, because there's so many other things going on, you know, with your team and so many other players and ADP values that you may or may not get. I'll tell you what though, my approach over these final 10 drafts for the Milly, I'm going to be very, very focused on Chris Rodriguez because no one's been drafting him at all, right? Through this point in time. I would imagine he has 0.1%, if that, right? Percent drafted in these Milly drafts. He started in the preseason. I think like my read on this situation is that they're willing to get rid of Brian Robinson, not just because they see the upside in Jacory Krosky Merritt, which I think that Bill is the upside play and he should be the one that gets steamed, but they do feel good about the early down bruiser in Rodriguez, which that's the role that Brian Robinson was playing, which is why I was not drafting Brian Robinson at ADP, because he's not a pass catcher, right? Like that's the thing that's the one thing that we should be looking for at running back. And the argument for B-Rob was, well, he could score 15 touchdowns. It's like, okay, doesn't really do it for me, because you could say that about a lot of running backs. But with Chris Rodriguez, if you look at his prospect profile, his size, what he's done in the NFL so far, you can squint and just see Brian Robinson with Chris Rodriguez. And so if they can save a little money, if they can maybe get some draft capital out of it, why not float Brian Robinson out there and say, okay, we were going to have to make a really tough decision on who we were going to keep on this roster, because Eckler and JCM seem like locks for the roster. So that means the third spot would come down to Chris Rodriguez and Brian Robinson. And if there's a way they can save money or get draft capital, even better, that's probably why they're thinking what they're thinking. And so I'm going to lean into Chris Rodriguez. I'm trying to now get Brian Robinson exposure. I made the mistake in that live stream. I drafted him. I reached for him because I was in a really dead spot in the draft, and I was really panicked and out of it, and it was a really bad pick. And that second team I drafted was absolutely horrific. But it was just, I just burned $20. But at least you guys got a nose trumpet out of it, right? I mean, guys, look, if you go and you watch that stream and you listen to me blowing my nose, it's a rite of passage as a father that you get louder for your sneezes. And
I have to try to make it. I have to try to make it into the air horns. That's my new task for the week, is to try to turn your nose trumpet into the air horns. That's my job this week.
I had no idea when I got back and I sat down at the chair. I had no idea that people could hear me blowing my nose, and so I'm like, all right, cool, yeah, we're good. And not only that, yesterday I was wearing red gym shorts. Okay, and so you could see it. You got a glimpse of my gym shorts as I got up, because no one ever sees my legs, and I wasn't going out in public. So what do I care if I'm wearing red gym shorts? But when people then see it on the internet, and they're like, why are you wearing a Dickies t-shirt and red gym shorts and blowing your nose? I was in a hot mess during that second stream. Regardless, I think that the move now is I'm going to try to get falling B-Rob value. Maybe he stays with Washington. I have no idea. I doubt that's the case, because he didn't even go to their preseason game last night against Cincinnati. He could go to Chicago, right? He could go to Dallas. He could go to one of these places where then it justifies where you were drafting him a little bit better before. Maybe, I mean, I don't think he's going to get to the point where he was like a mid-7th round pick. I just don't think that's going to happen again, especially if no team trades for him. But I do want some exposure, because he is a decent enough like bruiser. It's just, what Washington's basically saying is that they want to disguise what they're going to do a little bit better, and they probably feel a little bit better about Chris Rodriguez doing that, or Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt doing that, and obviously Austin Eckler being able to do that. The other wild thing I have to throw out there, it is insane to me that Austin Eckler's ADP has been completely unmoved and not changed at all throughout all of this. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people think that Crosky-Merritt is a big threat to Eckler, when Crosky-Merritt is much more of like an early down explosive type running back who maybe develops into more of a pass catcher. But Eckler to me is the pass catching back in that offense. So he's a great ADP value right now.
Eckler down 1.7 spots since training camp started. So no shift. There's everything around him is chaos in the Washington backfield. And Austin Eckler, like you said, the guy who's kind of just pinned in as the pass catching option in the backfield, is just not moving whatsoever.
And I can tell you that maybe the ADP move, maybe next week when we talk about, or if we talk about it, or maybe you just see his ADP go up. But I can tell you anecdotally, I've done probably like 4 or 5 drafts since a lot of this news dropped. Like yesterday's live stream, I didn't get the news that Brian Robinson hadn't even traveled with them for that or wasn't going to play in the preseason game and like wasn't going to be there or whatever. That changed my tune a lot, to the point where like, okay, this is happening. Like more than likely, I'd say like 95% chance he's not going to be on the team next year. And maybe by the time you guys listen to this episode, it's already happened, right? And so, I did drafts after that news broke, and Eckler was still going past ADP. It's just very, very strange to me for a guy, which by the way, when I first did the draft guide and I launched it on July 1st, he was a player to target or a late round dart throw for me, because his numbers last year as a receiver were actually not bad at all. And he has some contingent upside. And I think now, given what they're hinting and what they're wanting to do, he might see more early down work than we expect to. I just think he's a really, really great pick right now.
Brian Robinson can get cut, right? Like third round draft pick, $200K in dead money. Like it does nothing to them negatively financially to cut him. Obviously, they'll try to bait a late round day 3 pick if they can out of one of these teams. That's the objective. But these teams also know that he could just get cut too. Yeah. So yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy how quickly this accelerated.
Yeah, it moved very, very fast. Some other things going on for me this week with drafts that I want to at least touch on. I keep drafting Jaxon, Smith-Njigba. A lot of these are in the non-Milly drafts. So when you hear my exposures next week, we'll go over all of that. It'll be our final show of the season. I probably won't even bring up Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, but I'm doing a lot of like the $59, some of those like 10 entry or 10 max entry, 3 max entry. Like I'm trying to fill up basically everything that I can in the DK lobby right now with slow drafts and stuff. And I've just noticed that I'm currently preferring JSN to Tyreek Hill at the moment, just because of all this stuff. There's just a lot of bad vibes to Tyreek. I'm preferring JSN to him. And then there's also, I am trying to mix in some of the elite quarterbacks at times, like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. But there's just such a dead area in that range that if I go running back with one of my first 2 picks, or if I go like running back, I've gotten like a Saquon Brock Bowers team, I need to go wide receiver in the next round. And JSN just seems to be that dude. There's just a really obvious dead spot in the draft in like the mid 3rd round. Everyone feels it. Connor even talks about it during the interview. And so that's just kind of forced me to get more JSN exposure.
In that round, end of the 3rd, top of the 4th, it's JSN from a receiver standpoint right now, ADP. JSN, Marv, Garrett Wilson, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams. So yeah, it's kind of pick your poison, right? Every one of these guys has warts, and of course Tyreek Hill is going right before that. And if you want to talk about drumbeat, there has been the most negative drumbeat all off season coming from South Florida. Now we're hearing that Tua won't throw at Tyreek because of the wrist injury. Like nothing positive is coming out of Miami camp with regards to Tyreek Hill. So it's pick your poison in that area. Of the
I just don't want to be overexposed to Tyreek Hill. I got enough Tyreek Hill that I feel comfortable with, so I'm just not going to really force the issue with that. Another player that we probably should touch on, Emeka Egbuka. He's way up in my rankings right now because we just learned that Jaylen McMillan is going to be sidelined for a while because of that gruesome fall and spill that he had last week in the preseason game. So Emeka Egbuka now. So I was already going to move Egbuka up in my rankings because there were some bad vibes and bad reports about Godwin and his comeback. Like he's not even jogging on a separate field right now. So Emeka Egbuka now not only was going to be the clear-cut wide receiver 2 to start the season, now they don't even have the wide receiver depth that we thought. The only dude in front of him is Mike Evans, who, is on the wrong side of the age curve and has had soft tissue stuff and like hamstring stuff. And like Emeka Egbuka, to me, maybe this is a hot take, and I haven't, to be fair, I'm saying this without really sitting down and fully ranking things out, but I don't see the reason why Emeka Egbuka should go far after Tedero McMillan at this point in best ball drafts. Maybe that's a hot take, but and look, I mean, I've been very high on Egbuka. You guys know this if you listen to the podcast all offseason, not just Becoming a Best Ball Bro, but the Late Round podcast. Loved him as a prospect. Think he's in a very, very good spot. And so, maybe there's some bias there, but everything is pointing in the right direction for Egbuka. And I just don't see situationally how this is really not massively in his favor at this point. So I think he can establish himself now that these guys are sidelined the way that they are. And if he does, then it could just be game over from there if he shows out, which I think he will because he's good.
Last week, you and I were talking about the steam is getting a little too heavy for the Ohio State rookie. But then, of course, the McMillan injury and the news gets worse for Godwin. If he just steps into the WR2 role on this team, and maybe it's Godwin coming back from injury, maybe it's McMillan coming back from injury. I mean, it's wheels up. Like, right now in ADP, he's going after Zay Flowers or Jaylen Waddle.
Oh my gosh, yeah. At this point, it's easy. So yeah. If I look at my wide receiver rankings right now, like to me, it's easy. He was already basically in my opinion, with the Godwin stuff, he was going to be above Zay Flowers. He wasn't really even that far from Flowers. He was in the same tier as Flowers in my last rankings update. I'm going to take Egbuka over DJ Moore, over Courtland Sutton, over Travis Hunter. I think that he probably belongs in that, like, he probably belongs in that tier with like JMO, in my opinion. Like,
I was gonna say, JMO and Devonta Smith are the guys he should be pushing up.
And I love both of them. So like, it's just another guy that would go in that area. I'm fortunate that I drafted him a lot, so I probably don't need to force it. But some of those other contests that I'm doing in the slow drafts, like I took him in the late 5th because I was on the clock, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna do this at like 509 or so, which is not that far off from where he was going before a lot of this stuff. But I just feel really good about Egbuka, and I don't want to miss out. I want to be way, way overweight with him versus the market. I'm at like in the Milly, I think around 13% or so. And I looked at my average pick for Egbuka, and it was about 84th or 85th overall or something like that. So I feel good about where Egbuka's at. Now, where I don't feel great is Quinshon Judkins, where I didn't draft Judkins at all. I was assuming that things weren't going to be very clean and pretty this year, with this domestic violence situation that was going on. And obviously those charges were dropped. Now we're getting word that the NFL still might, look into this, and that Judkins still, he hasn't signed yet at the time of this recording.
Yeah, he doesn't have a contract.
Right.
So, and there's the Browns are saying that they might not even sign him until the NFL does their investigation, which how often does the NFL investigate players that aren't part of the union? Like, does he have union status? It's a mess right now.
I don't know any of the legal stuff. What I do know is that I'm still very worried, and I still think that, like, from a season long perspective, like a zero RB perspective, Dylan Sampson and Jerome Ford are still pretty attractive. I thought that Ford was honestly a decent enough pick before everything went down with Judkins, because I think he's the negative game script back, which is going to be helpful in a bad bad Browns team. I'm just not. I think that I'm just going to fade Judkins. Like, I'm just not going to lean into this new price. Maybe it'll be a big mistake, but it's just not a good enough player situation. And him being a rookie in camp, like, I didn't mind Judkins as a prospect, don't get me wrong, but I just think without camp and him being on this team that he's on, that's not supposed to be very good, or doesn't project to be very good. And with Dylan Sampson getting the work that he's gotten, with Jerome Ford being a good third down back / pass catcher, and just kind of a good solid backup for that team, with Judkins, it's a really hard sell for me to even still buy into Judkins with so much negative stuff still looming.
It's still a 10th round pick for somebody with massive question marks, right? Like, this isn't a very end of the draft dart throw. Like, in the 10th round, there are still players who we need to contribute on our roster. And like you said, if the upside case was there, if this was an offense that we project to break out, to score a ton, to be in these games, it would be a much different gamble. But we're quite bearish on the entire Browns operation, so it makes this gamble at this price very difficult to pull the trigger.
Yes. And then I'll talk about other mistakes that I've made that I regret. I have a lot of Jaylen Wright exposure from July. I was drafting Jaylen Wright on like every other team in July. And my mistake, in hindsight, I didn't lean enough into the actual profile of the player. Did I like Jaylen Wright coming out? I thought he was fine. I thought he fit this offense well, but he wasn't like a screaming, I love this dude as a prospect. And then the problem that I had, and in hindsight, I'm trying to think, like, was I making the wrong choice in the moment? And I say that because if you go read the prospect guide, Ollie Gordon was someone that the model really liked. And he had James Conner and Ramondre Stevenson as top comps. And he was a low risk profile by Draft Capital Delta, which means the model liked Ollie Gordon a lot more than where he was drafted in the NFL draft. The problem is, and this is, I think, why I didn't lean heavily into this, is that Jaylen Wright seemed to have a roster spot on lock, right? Whereas Alexander Mattison was competing with Ollie Gordon, and now Alexander Mattison has that season-ending injury, that neck injury, and so Ollie Gordon is the de facto RB3, and he is, predictably by the ZAP model, showing out and looking decent. I don't know if he's going to be great in the end. I have no idea, but what I'm saying is, like, so far so good versus what the ZAP model said. My issue and what I missed here was that when Madison went down, I should have been aggressive in getting Ollie Gordon. Like, I should have thought more about that and what that meant for my portfolio and how I've sort of approached that backfield. Now, Devon Achane's banged up right now, so Jaylen Wright probably still gets first crack in week 1 if Devon Achane's out, and maybe Jaylen Wright still gives me like, all I need is like 3 usable weeks from him, right, for it to be an okay get. But that's looking like an early L for me. And the other one is Roschon Johnson, who to me is more injury related because he's been banged up and he hasn't been able to practice and stuff. But I've also gotten a lot of Kyle Monangai, so that one's not as big of a deal. Like, I wouldn't feel bad about the Jaylen Wright thing if I got a lot of Ollie Gordon, but I haven't gotten a lot of Ollie Gordon. I'm going to try to over these final 10 drafts. There was one draft, one of the drafts that I did on the stream yesterday, where I'm like, okay, this is going to be an Ollie Gordon team, and Ollie Gordon went in round 13. So I'm not. It was a Will Shipley Ollie Gordon turn at the 13 or 12-13 turn or something like that. And so yeah, like I'm trying to get more Gordon. I think that was a mistake. I want to be transparent about mistakes. I can't sit here and say how excited I am about, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Emeka Egbuka without recognizing that I'm not very excited about Roschon Johnson and the injury that he's been dealing with, although I think that I covered my bases relatively well with Monangai. And then, B-Rob could just ruin both of them too if he ends up going to Chicago. But that's what you get with late round running backs in general. And then Jaylen Wright, I think that was just a big mistake. Like I just like, you're going to hear me talk about my exposures next week, and I'm warning you, he's going to be one of my highest rostered running backs because of the way that I drafted in July, thinking that him and his role was safe, and I wasn't leaning enough into that talent profile. I make mistakes. That's a mistake. Let's hope that it doesn't completely burn me this season.
Especially over a summer of drafting and injuries, like no one's going to be perfect, right?
Yeah, no, I know. Look, if my biggest like qualm with my teams is that I have, 18% Jaylen Wright or something like that, then that's probably not that big of a deal, especially because it's running back. But again, I try to like practice what I preach, and I talk about leaning into talent all the time. And if my process said there's a good talent profile in Ollie Gordon, then I probably shouldn't have been as aggressive as I was with Jaylen Wright. I was kind of reading into beat reports too much and reading into the idea that he was the clear-cut RB2 and that he was going to see more work. Maybe that comes to fruition still. I'm not trying to say that 9 carries in the preseason makes or breaks a take. So I'm not saying that it's complete dust and over for Jaylen Wright. What I am saying is I liked Ollie Gordon, and he now has a clear opportunity where he didn't before, and I should have really jumped on that as the Alexander Madison injury happened.
Well, what's crazy is, and I know you're only have 10 Milly drafts remaining, but there's still 2 weeks of drafting to go. There's still
I'm getting Ollie Gordon in all the Milly drafts. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all 10 of them. That's what's going to happen. Anyway, all right, let's get to the guests this week. I already talked about it. It's Connor Allen from 4for4 Football. He does fantasy content and sports betting content for them. Really, really sharp dude. We talked about how he manages his Milly teams this late in the draft season, some of the stuff that we just talked about, but in a little bit more detail. How much he cares about the preseason. I thought that was a really fun discussion. How he looks at players who steam up draft boards, so much more. Great conversation. He also has some interesting stacks as well. There's one stack that I agree with him on, but I don't know if everyone will necessarily agree with our stance on it. So give that a listen. So without further ado, here's the interview with Connor Allen. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply, void where prohibited, one per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. All right, Connor. We're at the home stretch. These summer-long drafts, like the Milly Maker, we're about to complete them. I only have about 10 left. I'm saving them basically for my live streams at this point so that I don't run out. But what's something that surprised you about that contest in particular most this year? Like, is it something that's been strategy related, maybe a player's particular ADP? What are some of the things that just have shocked you as this summer's gone on? Because I know that you've been drafting obviously all summer as well.
Yeah, there was one thing that stood out to me most, and that was that ADPs didn't shift for players with like known suspensions coming. So Rasheed Rice, it came out, a while ago, basically saying that he was probably going to face some sort of suspension, which was a bit of a surprise for us as a fantasy community, but was still routinely going like 3-4 turn. And, most of the projections were like, okay, he's going to face a 4 to 6 game suspension. So maybe, I think I was comfortable in like the mid fifth at that point,
right.
But he just wasn't getting there that much. And so then it comes out like, okay, well, now he's going to play the first 4 games, and now he's going to face maybe a 6 to 10 game suspension. We have no idea how this is going to go, and it could be at a pivotal time. He's still going in the 5th round. I don't really understand that. And another example is Jordan Addison. Jordan Addison, we knew the 3-game suspension was coming. He was going, and he's fallen 15 spots in ADP. So I was like, okay, well, I'll get more exposure later. I don't understand why the market hasn't reacted to this at all. So I thought that was like just one of the strangest thing of like, I know everyone in these drafts for the most part are paying attention, but it seems like they were just kind of missing something like that.
Yeah, the Addison thing is really interesting to me because I've mentioned this on the show before, but I had a back and forth on one of my live streams with somebody about that Addison suspension because I passed on him in a draft when it made sense for my build, but I said to myself, I'm going to get exposure to him later when his ADP inevitably drops, even though I think anyone that was like relatively paying attention to what was going on we knew in like May that Addison was likely going to get a 3-game suspension. And so it's just one of those things where you have to kind of try to read it was possible that it was already baked in, to his ADP. But to me, it's like when people see that out tag, when they see the questionable tag or any of these tags by these players' names, you can expect that player to drop. There was even a period of time where literally every single one of my drafts, and you can go watch the live streams of these too, every single one of my drafts, I was drafting Ricky Pearsall when he was on PUP, at the start of training camp. And we all knew that it was more of just a formality at that point, right? For him to eventually get back to doing things. That's been, I think it's a really good point to bring up because to me, that's one way with these like, summer long drafts to really extract some value.
Yeah. And like, I think Pearsall was going in the 90s at one point there. And that was maybe before his like, I don't know, training camp hype of him dominating targets when Juwan Jennings is out, Ayuk is out. So like he's, his target competition is a bunch of jabronis. So, I would expect him to do so, but now he's up to like the 60s. And so, yeah, just like having a tag next to a player's name on DraftKings, I don't know if it's like subconscious thing or just like people just don't want to draft him, maybe a mixture of both. But yeah, I think the tag makes a massive difference.
So this is kind of related to that. And I want to ask because you get Quinshon Judkins. So like I've just been fading Judkins all offseason, right? Like, and I think I've drafted him once in my Millys and I'm up to about 140 of them so far. Like I said, I have about 10 left, but then there's, Emeka Egbuka who's been steaming up draft boards. There's, now Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Bill, who comes out, we're recording this on Tuesday. So last night comes out, has a big touchdown run. And of course the fantasy community won't be rational about the fact that he still was playing with the second stringers and he was still not, starting for Washington. But I think that we see the path where that's generally going. Now, some of these situations like the JCM one, I was buying into, so this is a selfish question too. I was buying into that. I was obviously buying into Emeka Egbuka early, but I wasn't buying into like a Quinshon Judkins, right? Or in the opposite, from an opposite perspective, I was buying a lot into like Darnell Mooney, and then Mooney gets an injury and he falls. So the question I have is more at a high level. And obviously I'm assuming that some of this is going to be, individualized and it matters player by player. But when you see these shifts in ADP, for these summer-long drafts, for these 3-month drafts or tournaments that are going on, where that in May people are going to get different ADPs than the ADPs that we're getting here in August. Is it a situation where you invest in players at their new prices if you do or don't have exposure earlier on? Like maybe we could just use the Judkins example as one. So I'm fading Judkins. I've faded Judkins. Now he's an 11th round pick, let's say, right? Should I now go into this and say, I got to get some Judkins because 11th round still isn't that crazy and I should have some exposure if he is the Cleveland Browns RB1?
Yeah, I think it all depends on your risk tolerance. So from like a macro perspective, I would probably add a little bit. But at this point, again, if you're 140 in, you have 1%, like getting him almost in every draft of your last 10 is probably not going to really make or break the difference. And so I think like at that point, your bags are just kind of packed and you're where you're at. But like from a micro standpoint, so like as someone who I do a lot of work in like the betting, prop markets, et cetera, this is like a very similar concept to just like, a sunk cost fallacy of essentially. So like if I want to bet an under on Tony Pollard at 50 yards, say the new prop is the line moved, it's 40 yards. Like, I think you have to evaluate each circumstance like individually. It's like, just because it was at 50 and it's now at 40 doesn't mean that 40 isn't the value. It's all about just like reevaluating that at such point. So Emeka Egbuka is another good example you brought up as well. So like he was in the 90s for a long time and it was Emeka Egbuka versus like Josh Downs or versus, again, Darnell Mooney for a long time. Then it got, steamed up a little bit more and it was, Emeka Egbuka versus Ricky Pearsall and, maybe even Juwan Jennings. Now we're at the point where it's like, against Jaylen Waddle and Travis Hunter. Like at that point, I was kind of out. Like I have a lot of Emeka Egbuka early, but we got to the point where it's like constantly reevaluating, do I like this player or this player basically at all times? And so now at this point too, we have the Jalen McMillan news that just happened, probably an hour before we recorded or so. I mean, would you be surprised to see him go in the mid-5th? No. Like I wouldn't at this point at all, which again, but the McMillan news, I mean, it could matter a little bit because it just adds another path of like, Egbuka is going to be on the field all the time, seeing a ton of targets in a pretty good offense. Yeah.
I mean, the way that I kind of look at it too is that like we can and I want to let you respond and see if I'm thinking about this correctly because I think others might be thinking about this too. But like, I look at it as, is Emeka Egbuka in that position, like you said, like, is he still a good pick? Yes or no? So you check that box, yes or no. But there's also 19 other picks that are going on in that draft where ADP has shifted and morphed and is not the same as it was, before. So you might be getting values now that you wouldn't, or maybe not values as much, but we have a better idea of what depth charts might look like and such. So you're getting a clearer picture of what's going on now. So you can make more optimal choices maybe late in your draft. So even if you're getting Egbuka in round 5, let's say, instead of round 7 or round 8, later in your draft, you might also just be getting better values in general because you obviously have more information than you did, back in May and in June.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the argument too of like, oh, if a player shoots up 5 rounds, but you didn't get him, at that round, like, is the contest over? Like, do you lose if that player smashes? Yeah. And yeah, you're certainly at a disadvantage, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take them at, their new price because you're still going to have a unique build in other areas. Like you mentioned, you have more information in later rounds. You talked about, maybe a Jaylen Wright or Roshan Johnson, who you were heavy on earlier. You're probably not taking those guys anymore where you were before. And so you have unique builds in those situations. So yeah, I don't think that there's like, it's just an end all be all, but I do think that you should still be taking a guy if you think independently that they're a better pick at their ADP.
Yeah, I think sometimes like for at least the discourse that I see with Best Ball Bros, like it gets dumbed down way too much where it's like, oh, Devon Achane is now going to be, although before the Jonnu news, he kind of was in the spot that he's getting drafted now anyway. Right. But like, let's just use this example. Like, let's say that Devon Achane falls to the 2-3 turn or something like that. And then obviously, these Jamar teams who now have Devon Achane, you're sitting there and you're like, well, game over. But to me, I'm like, okay, that's 2 picks of 18, number one. Number two, we can't just assume, yes, like I like Devon Achane and I would expect him to do well in fantasy football, but we can't assume that like he has a stellar season, that he's not hurt, that he hits at the right time. Like there's just so many iterations and things that can go right or wrong that to me, it just seems to dumb down that argument a little bit.
Yeah. And every year it seems like the teams that make the finals, you're like, oh, like it makes sense, in hindsight, but like now, like in the time you're like, oh, right. Maybe I wouldn't have thought to do that. Or maybe, like none of the stuff that we worried about and we thought about actually came to fruition. And it was actually just a pretty normal team that just had really good players. I don't know. That's kind of how I approach it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, like in the end, like if Egbuka has a monster season, it doesn't really matter where you drafted him, right? Like if you drafted him in late round 4 versus round 8 or something like that, and he's just a dude who completely blew up, yes, you would rather have him in round 8. But if he's like that dude and you still got decent value, in round 5, round 6, round 7, I just have a hard time thinking that like that's going to make or break your season in the way that people talk about it.
Yeah, and like you said, you react the rest of the draft. So like, yes, you're using a round 4 pick on it, but then you still have all your other picks to potentially make new picks with new information. So like, again, that during that, what has it been like last couple weeks, I think a month, maybe that where he shot up 30 spots. So, I mean, a lot has changed since then, and a lot's going to change tomorrow and next week and every single time we're doing drafts.
Yeah, 100%. All right, I got to talk about the preseason because it's obviously going on right now. We saw Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt do what he did last night. I mean, Chris Rodriguez too, to start that game. How much do you factor in preseason to your evaluation and how you're drafting these guys? Like, what are the things that you're looking for?
Yeah, and I think that there's a ton of great analysis on preseason usage, but I think it mostly matters, in my opinion, for like fringe guys and rookies specifically. So less about the studs and more about, guys like Trey Harris, I thought would be a day one starter. Turns out he's behind McConkey, QJ, Keenan Allen, and Keandre Lambert-Smith is playing as QJ's backup right now, which is fleshed out in like most of the preseason stuff. Does that mean that Trey Harris is a bad pick? Not necessarily in fantasy, but it means that right now he's probably not going to play like that much early on in the season. And I think the same can go for like someone like Kyle Williams, someone like Pat Bryant, and then inversely, someone like Dante Thornton, who is playing over Jack Bash and is playing with the ones and is probably going to be locked in week 1 starter. So like, I think those are the types of things that are more signal than noise. I think there's a lot of like, I don't know, micro trends and things that are smaller that I don't necessarily buy or don't do too much with, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you're not buying that Brock Bowers is going to have like a 70% route participation this year?
No, like I just can't get there. I mean, he's awesome. I mean, he's like their best player by a good margin. And like, I would just be shocked if they're giving anyone other than him. Like, I mean, he's going to crush, I think, still. So I'm not worried about that at all. I'm taking the value on him as much as I can.
Like, I understand the thirst for, football and for understanding how these new coaching staffs might deploy these players. But I'm with you where like, I'd much rather look at their body of work in the NFL, watching them actually play and actually produce in meaningful games to me. And I think that also extends to some degree to, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, to like the Jacksonville backfield, for instance, right? Where we're seeing this rotation of like Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne and Bashal Tutin's been playing behind. And I think that that's the information where we're like, okay, more than likely Bashal Tutin's not going to be like heavily involved to start the season, right? But we can like him towards the back half of the season, whatever. But I saw like if you watch that Jags preseason game, we saw that dump off to Tank Bigsby, right? And he had a decent gain out of it. And I saw a bunch of tweets where they were like, "Oh, I thought Tank Bigsby couldn't catch," and yada yada yada. In my opinion, I would assume that teams are trying to put players in certain positions that they are not typically, like Braylon Allen playing third down, for instance. Is that signal? Does that matter? Maybe, but maybe not. Like, I don't think that we can run away and be like, Breece Hall, one of the best pass catching running backs in football, isn't going to be on the field on third downs. Maybe they like Braylon Allen's pass pro, whatever. But to me, it's also about repetitions, right? It's about seeing what these guys are actually capable of doing and then being able to evaluate more deeply versus what you're just seeing out of these guys in practice.
Yeah, that's such a good point, too. I mean, Isaiah Davis was out, too, who like was in the first game played as like the pass catching guy there, right. And Braylon Allen just mixed in on early down. So, yeah, I think that there's a whole layer that we don't really understand as like outsiders to like the industry that you see NFL players come out all the time. Like, so I think the Caleb Williams clip went viral of like him throwing into the net. And they were like, yeah, this is a drill where he had to get the ball out as fast as he possibly could. And he was trying to just like whip it in. It was like throwing screen passes, basically. And so no one understood that context. All fantasy Twitter saw was like Caleb Williams looking like an idiot and missing the 3 plays. And like, oh, Caleb Williams bust. Yeah. What a loser. And so, but then NFL players like, no, this is just like how this works, And so we as outsiders don't really know that. And I think that there's something similar for fantasy, for preseason, where like coaches are trying new things, to your point, or they're trying to put players in other spots that maybe they aren't going to. But yes, I think that there's like some good macro trends, but at the same time, like if we're nitpicking every single thing about where a player lines up, I don't know if there's like as much signal as we want to believe at this point, just because based on like how granular we're getting with everything, with all of our analysis of it.
I just thought of a really bad analogy that I'm going to throw out there. It's sort of like looking at a draft board, a fantasy draft board, without knowing the scoring and the requirements, right? Like there, I was at the Kings Classic in Canton last week, or I guess a week and a half ago, and I did the Kings Classic snake draft, where you're starting a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wideouts, and 3 flexes, and it's full PPR, right? So of course I'm going to go with like a hero RB, just pound wide receiver, especially as the rest of the room was more running back heavy than I expected. And then the board gets tweeted without any context of like what the league is. And people are like, what is JJ doing drafting 6 wide receivers in the first 7 rounds? But then obviously once you get that context, you're able to sort of understand a little bit. Maybe that analogy doesn't hit. Maybe it does. We'll move on to the next question. Quarterback. How have you handled the quarterback position on DraftKings this year? Have you noticed yourself going towards the big 4? Maybe you see it as a big 5 with Joe Burrow. Are you waiting more frequently? We get to that area of the draft where there's often that quarterback run in that like round 10 to 12 area. How have you been handling it?
Yeah, I mean, so in DraftKings, I basically draft 3 in almost every draft. Underdog obviously is a little bit more up in the air, 18 versus 20 rounds, et cetera. But I think, it really depends. Like, so lately I found myself drafting a decent amount of Lamar and Josh Allen, kind of in that like middle third. And then if they fall at all to the late third, I'm definitely picking them there. There's kind of like this weird dead zone for me where I feel really good about the guys, like the wide receivers in like the early 4th to like mid 5th. And I feel pretty good about like, up to JSN-ish in the third round. But Devontae has the Stafford things. Marv is not really one of my guys this year. And I'm not drafting any Breece Hall, not much Kenneth Walker. So like this 3-4 turn for me has been mostly just a dead zone, essentially, of like guys that I don't really want. So I'm either pulling guys up from the 4th round in there or luckily getting a quarterback. And so I have no problem taking one of Lamar, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts to some extent. And then Jaden Daniels is tough because of the Terry McLaurin situation, I think. So, but I would love him in that group, assuming Terry plays, assuming he's there. I think he's a fine addition to that group. And I know that Terry he was like a mid-third, early third guy. So like a 3-4 stack of Daniels and McLaurin is very much in play right now in draft, if not a reach at this point. And like, I think viable relative to the current players there. So I've been taking a decent amount of them. And then if not, basically trying to take 2 quarterbacks in that 10 to 12 range. And then one more later guy as well, kind of in like the, I don't know, Darnold, maybe some. I had some Stafford. I'm a little bit skittish at this point, to be honest. But and then we can get into it later with some of my favorite stacks. But I got a surprise late guy that I'm sure you'll love.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's been a consistent theme with a lot of these interviews is people, and I agree. Like, I hate, unless someone falls, unless like a T Higgins falls, or like I've been drafting a ton of JSN recently. Basically because of what you're talking about, right? Like, because I can make the bowl argument for him, but then I can't make that argument and I need to like not just draft Amari and Hampton and stuff, like I need to diversify a little bit and not just like go with the same build over and over again. But yeah, man, that mid to late third versus the late 4th, early 5th, I don't really see a big difference in player value at that point, right? And I do think that it's kind of nice the way that it's laid out because I do think that the early 2nd round is better than the late 2nd round, right? And so because of that, at least the back half of the 1st is still getting, a good pairing to start the draft. So maybe it evens out in terms of fairness at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's a really, really awkward and weird. And sometimes when you are in the middle of the draft, you get stuck with just like one pick right before you over and over and over again. It's just a very frustrating draft.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think drafting from the end is one of the challenging parts because like you said, not because of the 1-2 turn. I mean, you can pair some of those awesome receivers, whether it's Brian Thomas, Neighbors, Nico, et cetera, but it's the 3-4 turn that just, I like, I'm, banging my head against the wall every time I'm there because I just don't know what to do. So I've been mixing it up, doing a wide variety of different things, as well as drafting some George Kittle as well in that spot. Yeah.
I think that's also why we've seen like Travion Henderson get drafted a lot higher, like into that 3rd round area, because obviously the steam is there, but like, I don't think that there's like nearly as big of an opportunity cost difference in doing that versus when you were drafting him in like, early round 5 or something, like I can understand why people might want to go that route. So keep that in mind, while you're drafting is, you as in the listener, that if you feel like you're forcing it a little bit, you're probably not in that area of the draft. I have the exact same question for you, but with tight ends, because it does feel like there is just that big 3. Are you attacking them and getting them a lot? And then, are you going after the Laporta, Hawkinson, Andrews, Kelsey type tier, or are you kind of going big or going home?
Yeah, so admittedly, I don't have as much of that middle tier as you mentioned, like the Laporta, Hawkinson, Kelsey tier. I think that Hawkinson is fine, and Laporta, I've been mixing it a little bit. I don't have very much Kelsey this year outside of like if I'm taking like a Chief stack or something like that. I do have a lot of George Kittle for a lot of the same reasons that I mentioned in that 3-4 turn. I've been fine taking him. I took him a bunch in the early mid fourth. Now with all the injuries and everything, like I've been taking him in late third if I really, think that that's right for the build. And then falling Bowers, we already talked about that. Like mid to late second, I think is more than in play for him. But also a guy, if I have an early pick, I'm fine taking Trey McBride at the 2-3 turn as well. Yeah. So like I've taken, you start with Chase, and then one of the running backs is usually there, whether it's Jacobs, I guess not Chase Brown anymore, but he used to be right around there, right. Bucky Irving, and then Trey McBride. So like you can start with a 1-1-1, start there with Trey McBride. So, and then I think you pair those guys with some of the those super high upside or just like late tight ends that are there. Like I think Chig is really interesting. Mason Taylor, you're getting these guys like 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th round. And I think there's a lot of good late round tight ends this year. So I think pairing one of the elite guys with, one or two of the other players is interesting. Another guy that I've been taking a lot of is after that Andrews tier, I was taking a bunch of Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland in the 11th-ish, 10th round. Now, obviously, their ADPs are going up a little bit, so not really actionable advice there. But I think that tier is pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, I think that the difference with quarterback and tight end is quarterback dries up, right? And people recognize that. We've been talking about that all summer. Quarterback dries up. People recognize that, and you can't just get a 17th round, 18th round starter. Now you're going to Jaxon Dart and crossing your fingers that the Giants suck and that he's going to start at the end of the year,
Right.
And so it's just a different vibe. Whereas you can realistically get tight end production, late. Like you said, Mason Taylor, especially, Taylor dropped after that high ankle that he miraculously, both him and Justin Fields, now that I'm thinking about it, they came back so much quicker than anyone expected them to come back from those injuries. Fields had that toe, Mason Taylor had that high ankle, and then he was back in a week, and the market isn't always adjusting back for that. But like you said, there's just a lot of dudes, that you can get late at tight end, and it makes it pretty attractive to go with a build like that. All right, you teased this a little bit, so I'm very curious. Who are some of your go-to stacks here in 2025?
Yeah, so one of my favorites is 49ers stacks. So I think Kittle, one of Pearsall and Jennings, and then Purdy in the hundreds is just such an easy stack. You really don't even have to force it. You can get it from basically wherever spot you're in for the most part. So I have a ton of those. And then another one, I just can't get enough of the Cowboys passing game. I mean, the running back room is the worst in the league. They added George Pickens. Their defense is not very good, especially in the secondary. In my opinion, all that means is ton of passing, probably super concentrated target share between Pickens and CeeDee Lamb, maybe some Jake Ferguson, but then you can add him late. Again, he's middle round pick. I don't think he's very good, but he's going to catch a lot of balls probably because of volume. So I think all of those guys with Dak is a really good one. And then you just touched on him here a little bit. So I do have a just ridiculous amount of Jaxon Dart late with Darius Slayton and Theo Johnson. The Giants' schedule is so insanely difficult. Russ can play good. He can play well. He can play decent, honestly. And they are probably still going to be 2-6, 3-7 in these first couple weeks. Because it's at Washington, at Dallas, Kansas City, Chargers. They have an easy game at New Orleans. Then it's Philly, Denver, Philly, San Fran, Chicago. How does Russ survive? Russ survive this? Because when you're the ownership, you drafted Jaxon Dart, Dable's on the hot seat, Shane's on the hot seat. You have to make a change at some point, and you're getting Dart for the playoffs. So, I'm not banking on him being an early season contributor, but I think anywhere from week 5 to 9, I think makes a lot of sense.
I'm totally with you. It's one of the easiest stacks you can go with. You can even get a bring back, with a Deontay Thornton or something for that week 17 game. But I think Theo Johnson's been a great value. Darius Slayton's just kind of an obvious and easy go-to late. But I'm with you from the standpoint of you should be in my opinion, you should be drafting Jaxon Dart if you think the Giants are not a playoff team, because there's almost a 0% chance that they don't see that we don't see some Jaxon Dart this season. If they're a 3 or 4 win team, let's say that they're 4-8 at some point, right? And Russell Wilson's still starter. What's the use? Because both the entire staff, their jobs are on the line too. So if they show that they got it right with Jaxon Dart, then they could hypothetically potentially keep that job year over year. And I think that we're seeing kind of like the opposite of that happen right now with like Indianapolis and the way that they've handled things with the quarterback situation, where like they're like, oh, we need to win. Our jobs are on the line, and you need to have buy-in from owner, front office to coaching staff to really have like a seamless, like, okay, no, we're going to be logical with this. Otherwise, you just get a logical, and maybe Daniel Jones does a lot better than I think he's going to do, but you get an illogical, decision. Because I, in my opinion, like Indianapolis is looking at what's going on there, and they're saying, no, we're going to go with Daniel Jones over Anthony Richardson because that's the only way that we could win, instead of just giving Anthony Richardson some reps, right? And I feel like with the Giants, there might be a little bit more buy-in across all levels, where they're like, okay, if Russ is not good, if he's dust, or if we just don't win, like you said, Jaxon Dart steps in. If he shows us something over the final 5-6 games of the year, then they could keep their jobs hypothetically, right? And
Totally.
so that's why, yeah, I mean, I'm all for that.
And it's one of the problems that I know Bears fans, any listeners have, understood for a while. It's like a misalignment between ownership, the front office, and the coaching staff, where like the goals aren't always aligned. So like in an ideal world, you have a really long leash with Anthony Richardson, and he's playing a lot, and he's like, growing and developing. And that was like the goal all along. Now injuries and poor play has been a problem, but now they're at the point where like they have to win. And so they are making the decision of like, who gives me the best chance to win right now? Is that the best decision for the Colts long-term? No shot. Like there's no way that is the best decision. But it's the best chance for Steichen and the front office to keep their jobs. And so that's the problem. And then same goes to the Giants. But I think the Giants situation is different, where they feel like, okay, we can give Russ a shot. If he's cooking and they're winning, like that, they hit it. And if not, then they still have the chance of like selling Jaxon Dart, as you mentioned. So like they have 2 outs to keep their jobs. I think the Colts are really in trouble, honestly, at this point.
Yeah, I also think the Giants have a low-key decent roster. Like it's not like like that front can do work on the defensive side. They obviously have Malik Neighbors, and their backfield looks a lot better. And like so you can like see how the Giants would think that they're more competitive than they will, based on like they're not looking at the schedule the way that we would. I mean, they probably are, but like you as a football player / football coach / front office, you don't get handed the schedule and be like, oh my God, we're screwed. Like, you're not going to have that attitude. But, as analysts, I think that we can look at it and say, yeah, they're probably screwed. And we'll probably see Jaxon Dart sooner rather than later. All right. 2 more questions before I let you go. Who are some of your biggest targets this year? You can give me a couple guys, and then some of your biggest avoids. So you obviously gave us some stacks, but what about individual players?
Yeah, a guy that I've been drafting a ton of lately, Tony Pollard. I think he should be a 5-6 turn guy. So, he's still going like mid-late 6th, but I just don't think the market's caught up yet. O-line's better. Offense should be way more efficient with Cam Ward. I mean, people aren't really talking about the upside outcome of Cam Ward taking even like a 80%, 60% Jaden Daniels leap in year one and really turning this team around. Like, I think that's very much in his range of outcomes. And so, like, again, a more efficient offense. And then you have Tajay Spears, high ankle sprain. The Titans talked about today how they need more running back depth and like need a backup running back. And then beyond that too, like last year, even when the coaching staff was like, yeah, we want Tajay Spears to be involved. I mean, they just didn't follow up on that. Like it was just Tony Pollard when he was healthy. He has suffered through his own ankle injuries as well, but I think he's in a good spot to, again, be a fringe workhorse, running back at this point in an offense that could surprise. And so like, he's going to see a lot of work, and I think is a pretty good pick at this point, especially if you miss out on running back early. I think he's like a great, for me, kind of 0 or hero RB like addition in like the 5-6 turn in that range. Another one, I mentioned him earlier briefly a little bit. Tyler Warren, I think, is really, really interesting. Like I know he's up to the 80s, and he's another guy that we touched on too, of like chasing players, in a certain ADPs. I think in some situations he's still kind of fine where he's going in the mid 80s. Downs is banged up. Pittman, I think, is very much fine. And Daniel Jones, I think, provides a little bit higher of a ceiling for the passing game. But also, too, like Tyler Warren played over 40 snaps at quarterback, running back, out wide, in line, in the slot in his final season at Penn State. Like with Anthony Richardson out, I wouldn't be surprised if they use Tyler Warren with some goal line stuff, if they give him like more designed stuff. So like I think his upside here is pretty significant if he can be like a half decent tight end plus any design stuff for him as well. So those are 2 of my favorite ones, but then one more late round one that I have that's like a best ball only, not buying in redraft. Ray McLeod, I have a lot of. So played like 90% of the snaps last year. Mooney's out. Penix, I think his target share with Penix was awful. Like I'm not going to get around it, but he's going to play a lot in a team that I think should throw more. And like he had some games where he popped last year. He's like a 19th round pick, 20th round pick. Like he's going to have some spike weeks. in redraft, he has like no upside to become an alpha. Right. He has no upside to like really be like the guy. But I think he's going to provide some like usable floor weeks plus like some spike weeks in best ball, which is, not a popular take, but he's one of my higher owned players, which I don't feel love saying out loud, but I'm dying with the ship here.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's my at least not as much anymore, but my Ray McLeod is Devon Vele. So I'm with you on the completely random, but at least yours has this like very obvious path to volume right now. It's like no one's adjusted at all based on the Darnell Mooney stuff and based on the fact that Kyle Pitts, we can't just assume he's going to be good all of a sudden, right? So it's really just Drake London. And Drake London also has not really shifted at all based on the Darnell Mooney stuff.
I've been taking some Drake London like early second, like trying to find some unique pairings of the 1-2 turn using London because, I mean, he had 31 targets in 2 games with Penix last year and Darnell Mooney is hurt. Like he could just like outright crush. Like what if he just gets targeted 10 times a game? Like he's like a top 3 pick next year.
Yeah, I mean, I have him in the same tier as all the other, late first round type players. So I'm definitely with you. And then who are some of the guys that you're fading this year? I think that's always the more difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's some obvious ones. So I have like 1% Breece Hall, 1% Brandon Ayuk, 1% Chris Godwin. I have no Joe Mixon, and I won't be drafting Joe Mixon, and no matter the price. Kind of a more surprising one, I guess interesting, is like 2 guys in the mid 4th round and like late 4th round, early 5th. I don't have much Chuba Hubbard or Alvin Kamara, and it's not necessarily like an indictment of them. I think they're both like fine. I don't like hate them. It's just that I love those wide receivers. Like I want those, the George Pickens, the Tets at one point, the DJ Moores, like in that range. Like I want all of those guys almost on every single team. And so I kind of found myself with like a pretty hard fade on some of those like late 4th, early 5th running backs. And so Chuba Hubbard and Kamara have kind of been the main culprits of that.
Yeah, I have very, very similar builds. Chuba, I have question marks about his pass catching upside. And then with Kamara, I mean, I'm not even one that believes that like, oh, he's definitely going to break down at the end of the year or anything like that. It's just been more of a, like you said, the wideouts being there, just being so like, there's just so many high ceiling wide receivers in that range where you're like, yeah, I could see this guy being a top 12 wideout and being a true difference maker in a PPR format, best ball format. Like you got to probably lean that way, as the tiebreaker more often than not. Connor, this was awesome, man. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that great stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. You can find me on Twitter at Connor Allen NFL, and you can find all of my fantasy football takes and betting takes over at 4for4.com.
You can get my draft guide over on lateround.com. Make sure you subscribe to the show and check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@lateroundff. You can watch this show on the YouTube channel, so check it out. You can see my ugly mug each and every week. Otherwise, everyone, as always, thanks for tuning in.